Okay, good afternoon and welcome to our first Cal's Conversations Quarantine Edition. I'm Will Reese with Next Level Sports. I'm the director of the Collegiate Athletics Leadership Symposium. We'd like to welcome all our Cal's community that have been with us at our past events today, as well as those newcomers that haven't had a chance to make it to any of our events. We hope this gives you a quick taste of what we're about, which is delivering relevant and timely content from some of the best leaders in our industry. Our mission at Next Level is simple, and that's to serve the people of college athletics. Through CALS and our other events, we focus on convening leaders and creating opportunities for them to learn and connect with each other. We created CALS Conversations as a way to continue to do that through these strange times that we're in right now. I actually want to kick it off today. We actually have some CALS news. As I figure my way around here, we had previously announced that CALS 20 at the end of September, our 10th annual edition, will be in New Orleans. Well, today we're excited to announce that our co-host for the first time, Troy Dannon, Director of Athletics at Tulane University, and Tim Duncan, Director of Athletics at the University of New Orleans, will serve as our co-host for this event. We've been working with them behind the scenes for a while and are glad to announce that today here on our first CALS Conversations. Troy and Tim have both been very involved in CALS over the last several years and are really excited to have them involved as co-hosts. Obviously, along with everyone else, we're monitoring the situation that's developed because of the pandemic, the global pandemic, and in particular, the ability to travel and gather moving forward. We're committed to bringing you CALS in some fashion. So as we continue to make those decisions in the days and weeks and months to come, we'll be sure to communicate with everybody. But as of now, we're excited to make this announcement. All right, we're really excited to start off the CALS Conversation with a great panel today. You might notice that this has a distinct Oklahoma flair, with me coming from my home here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We've got Wren Baker. Wren is from Valiant, Oklahoma, which, if you don't know Valiant, it is the metroplex of southeastern Oklahoma. And of course, we've got Joe Castiglione with us, and Joe Castiglione is literally in the Oklahoma Hall of Fame. Well, let's be honest. Since quarantine began, Oklahoma's taken some PR hits due to the availability to binge the Tiger King. So what we're here today is to hopefully change the narrative and turn this around with our friend, and expose some of our friends to some of our favorite sons here from Oklahoma, and hopefully turn this around for our people that have had a limited contact with our state. At this time, I'm excited to introduce our moderator, Jason Fine. Jason is the Director of Athletics at Bates College in Maine, previously at the College of Staten Island and Drew University. Jason is a longtime CALS attendee, past moderator, and friend of CALS. There's so many of these stories, over the last 10 years as we've produced CALS. Jason is not an Oklahoma guy, he's straight out of Brooklyn. And but the fact that I get to be friends and have met and build a relationship with Jason through Cal's is one of my favorite parts of our event. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jason to give you some ground rules here and to introduce our panel. So looking forward to a great time with you all, and really appreciate these guys taking the time to be with us. They're busier than ever, and looking forward to a great session.
Thanks, Will. Thank you, everybody. Will, the feeling is absolutely mutual, and never did I think in my life that I'd have so much of a great relationship with a fellow from Oklahoma like yourself. And thank you for letting the Brooklyn guy come on here and help moderate this panel with Joe and Wren. We've got about an hour, everybody. We want to try to get to a few broad-ranging topics. You will notice that there is a question and answer button that you can submit questions on. We'll be happy to try to take those as we get towards the end of the program, see if we can have some questions for our panelists. The chat function and the raise your hand function have been disabled. So if you want to try to get your question in, do that through the question and answer panel, and we'll be monitoring that and see if we can get some questions in. So let me start by thanking our panel and by introducing who we have with us, even though I'm sure many of you know them. First, we have Wren Baker, who's in his 4th year as the Vice President and Director of Athletics at the University of North Texas, which was our Cal's 2019 host institution. He has made an incredible impact on the Mean Green and spearheaded one of college athletics' most remarkable turnaround stories of the past decade. In 2018-19, it was one for the record books, with every Mean Green team achieving a winning season for the first time in school history. And UNT programs combined to post the highest overall winning percentage since 1978-79. UNT also reached new heights in the classroom under Wren's leadership, posting back-to-back department GSR records. 11 of the 14 programs recorded a cumulative GPA of 3.0 or higher in 2016-17 and again in 2017-18. So welcome, Wren. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And also, of course, we have Joe Castiglione, who's the Vice President of Intercollegiate Athletics Programs at the University of Oklahoma. After more than 20 years, few have experienced the success that Castiglione and the Sooners have enjoyed together. During his tenure, OU's won 19 national championships, half of the all-time university total, celebrated 92 conference titles over that time period. So it's more than just success that sets his tenure apart. It's the consistency of that success that makes the department stand apart from others. In 17 of his 21 years, Sooners have ranked in the top 25 in the Learfield Directors' Cup standings. A total of 14 of the 21 sport teams in 2018-19 sent the full team or individuals to an NCAA postseason event. And even more important, GPA numbers and graduation rates continue to set program records. The 2019 spring semester marking the 15th consecutive that student athletes as a group recorded a 3.0 or better. Welcome, Joe. Thanks for taking the time to be here with us.
Thank you, Jason. Pleasure to join you, Wren, Will, and all those people out there that we can't see, but we know you can see us.
Yeah, it's a little intimidating knowing that they can all see us and we can't see them, but happy to be here with everybody. I think we'll jump right in and get started. As I mentioned, we've got a few larger topics and we'll drill down on them as we go. But I think in light of the very interesting times that we are now finding ourselves living in, it's important that I start by asking both of you, how are you doing? How are you holding up through COVID-19? And how are you dealing with the new normal of the way that we go about our jobs now during this time? So I'll open it up to you guys.
Joe, you go ahead. Okay. Well, Jason, we're doing great. And I say we because it's not a one-person operation. I found such true joy and I guess you could say confidence brewing, because I've seen some amazing work by our coaches, our staff, and most notably the student athletes who all had their seasons abruptly end. Some were toward the end of their season, didn't get to have the postseason. Some were maybe a third of the way through their regular season. And all of the student athletes with the rest of the students were advised to leave campus and go home. That happened for us right at the beginning of spring break. So some of them had already left. and some of them were already planning to go. But I've just seen some amazing response from all of them. So the only way for us to be as leaders is to be strong, to be consistent, to communicate, to be available, and to really really provide that stability that everybody's looking for. And it's really tough because we know we're in uncharted waters, unprecedented times. Pick whatever phrase you want to describe it, but it's the constant churn of uncertainty that is really tough, and tough for a leader, because we're all trying to be the right kind of models and be the visionaries and think about the way we need to position our programs going forward. But everybody's keeping a healthy outlook and staying healthy on the same vein. So it's given us a chance to be ready to emerge when we finally do get the go-ahead.
Wren, how about you?
Yeah, much the same. I mean, obviously, the uncertainty of the future is difficult for everybody. But I've always answered this when people have asked me. My family's healthy. We're all here together, and I work with a bunch of great coaches and staff members and student athletes and colleagues at the university, and so I consider myself very blessed. And this is difficult times, but we've seen very difficult times before in this industry and on our campuses. And I think there is some comfort in knowing that we're all going through this together. You don't usually have everybody kind of on the same page. And I think the most difficult thing is not having answers. But the one thing I know is that we're going to find a way to work through it. And when you know that that's going to be the end result. The rest of this is a process that may be difficult at times, but we'll find a way to get back to doing what we love, and that is helping student athletes grow as people, as students, and as athletes.
Do you find that consistency is important? And now that we've settled into kind of this new normal over the last few weeks, we know that the $1 million question of when we'll be back is something that no one can really answer. So how do you engage on a day-to-day level with your staff, with your coaching staff, your administrative staff, to help lead them through and continue on while you really can't answer the big question that everybody wants to know?
Want to go first, Wren? We'll bounce back and forth.
Yeah, we can do that. It is difficult when you don't have those answers because the coaches want to know, and as simple as when can they come back, and so and so I think it's difficult, but I think what's important is the consistency and frequency of communication. Even if you don't have real updates to give, I think it's just reassuring for them to hear from the athletic director and from department leaders during this time, and impress upon them the same significance of interacting with their staffs and for the coaches with the student athletes. When we do get an update, I try and get it out as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, with some of the updates, at least national updates, they're released to the media and on social media from the NCAA as soon as it's done. And so you really don't get a chance to get out ahead of that sometimes, and then it starts to take a life of its own, and you're kind of fighting from behind. But I think it's just really important to stay consistent with that communication. And one thing that we've started doing with all of our meetings is I'll end with picking a staff member or coach and ask them a few questions. Some of them are lighthearted and fun, but the last question is always, what are you most looking forward to when we return? Because I think it's just important to keep people focused on, we are going to return. There is a future. Let's not let the circumstances of today be so heavy and weigh on us so much that we take our eyes off the future.
Yeah, that's well said. I find that maybe meeting in smaller groups has been helpful. As ADs on this call know, and we're all part of president or chancellor staffs, and we're engaging with other executive officers on campus as we are called. We're trying to be good partners there too, as campus leaders are dealing with the wide variety of unknowns when students are going to come back on campus, and how are they going to come back, and whether we're going to have in-person classes, and the economic impact of all of this on the campus at large. Obviously, we have a mixture on this call of public and private universities, so there's a little bit of difference sometimes between the two, because we're also connected to, in some ways, what the state decides, or what we hear out of, our federal government. So we have to kind of move between, the lines there properly. But internally, what I've been doing is really trying to be intentional about three things: communication, collaboration, and connectivity. And things are moving, like Wren said, at times that are not conventional. And maybe part of that's our time. I've been on a call with coaches talking about certain things, and I had up to the minute, quote unquote, intel earlier that day. And after we get off a call with the coaches, something comes out from the NCAA that we didn't even know what it was coming, so that's been frustrating, because as a leader, you want to be able to be the source of information. And as Wren says, we're trying to share it and be completely transparent about what we know. It's a little bit frustrating too, when as a leader, you're supposed to know these things and people are asking, why don't you know? But we sit here and listen to the key experts in our country, and they could give us some parameters and what it might be, and certain criteria to work around. But if you ask them a specific question, even they can't say for sure. And I think they've been probably as good as possible communicating with us. I mean, I think especially, the Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx and, the other public health officials are doing their very best. It's not easy. It's never a perfect answer for everybody, but I think they're doing their very best. And that's what we try to do for our staff. So I meet with our coaches through these Zoom calls, other teleconferences, one-on-one if necessary. I have our staff, senior staff, meet once, maybe twice a week. I've broken down the opportunity to meet with our entire department into smaller groups. And my chief of staff organizes those. It's called a Cup of Joe with Joe. So it's kind of informal. But it's a way to connect with them. We've averaged something like 25 to 40 people per call. And I've had 6 of those so far, and I have them twice, maybe 3 times a week. And so we just kind of rotate through the various areas. I've tried to do that instead of one large department-wide call, because I can see people. I'm more of a relational leader. I try to see people, and it's hard for me even in this call where everybody's watching us and I can't see them. They're like a big crowd. But I think those kinds of things have been helpful. I've popped on a few calls that our student athletes are having, our teams are having. Our coaches are doing a wonderful job. Our student athlete advisory committee have been having calls at least once a week. I've popped on those just to say hello and check in with them. I don't even stay on the whole call, but just to let them know. Some of the student athletes have reached out to me, and I think that's wonderful. And so you have these ways that you're connecting and trying to push the idea of communication and collaboration. And I think those things have really helped. They want to know more than we can give them, as we've said. But what we're trying to do now is find these ways of creating these small wins, these things that we're doing. I heard it referred to by a friend of mine as, swimming to a buoy. So there's something out there you could latch onto. People are getting fed up with the idea there's no real plan they can focus on yet, no destination they could head towards. So we got to figure out these ways, like Wren said, to keep people excited about what's ahead, whenever it's ahead, and be able to push on the gas pedal as soon as we're given the green light that we can start bringing our staff and our student athletes back to campus, obviously safely.
Yeah, and we'll come back to some of the creative ways that maybe some of our staff are getting things done in this new situation we find ourselves in. But let's talk a little bit about that contingency planning that is going on everyone's campus. What are you both seeing as you try to make broad plans for the unknown as far as when we can return, in terms of budget planning, in terms of academic calendar shifts, in terms of athletic calendar planning? You know, what types of modifications can you see possible with football schedules and beyond if this goes further into the fall and the winter? Joe, we'll start with you.
Well, I say this at the front end because it's absolutely non-negotiable in terms of whatever we decide. And that is, we're focusing first and foremost, not just when, but how we can get our student athletes back on campus, deal with whatever the medical protocols are at the time, be able to react appropriately if we do run into someone having or contracting the virus, and what we do there, whether there's any kind of holding period or quarantine time that we have to adjust to before we can actually get them together or get them in our facilities, whether they're going to be allowed to be together as a group or smaller numbers. So we're modeling, all the different approaches like that. But that's first and foremost. We are not going to at all compromise anybody's health, welfare, or safety, period, non-negotiable. And a lot of people keep asking me as an AD, as I'm sure a lot of people on this call get asked, what about a football season? What about the economic impact? And what about this? And what about that? All fair questions, because those are elements of our job. But if we don't get our student athletes back on campus, those are all moot. And so first and foremost, that's what we're focusing on. So the easiest way, we thought, because I will tell you this, there's no one person that has every answer, and particularly when things are so certain and the targets are always moving. We had an experience with engaging with our staff differently that we employed probably about 10 months ago. And we take some very key topics and we assemble about 5, maybe 6 people at the most to take on these topics. And they have about 2 weeks to deal with it. They're given some instructions about what we want them to come back with in terms of a deliverable. And then they go and they work on it and they come back and make a report. And so we had this organizational methodology already in place, and it's been very helpful because we can pick people out of our program, and it represents every kind of area. It's not about title, it's not about position, but we have had some of the most amazing responses from people and their creativity, their innovation, and they're dealing with those very things you mentioned, Jason: budget, what it's like for student athletes to get back on campus. Certainly, what is a new normal going to be like? We know it's not going to be the same like it was when we all had to withdraw from campus and then, be in certain parts of the country where you're sheltering in place or have, more limitations than others. And so we've broken this down to all of these different areas that represent student athletes, that represent staff, that represent our stakeholders, because we know that's another element of this all. And then, the teams themselves. So what are we going to face in terms of the ability to compete after, of course, we have student athletes on campus and able to practice and prepare for a season. So all of those different things are emanating from those 4 zones, if you will. And then we get into a deeper dive on specific criteria. And our sports medicine, our performance people are all engaged around that sort of transition from off campus to on campus and everything that relates to their medical and well-being, including mental health.
Yeah, Wren, Dr. Emmert said this week he was cautiously optimistic about a return in the fall to somewhat normal sports. Dr. Hainline from the NCAA said that, a phased approach might be likely as testing spreads. I think that aside from testing being available, as Joe just mentioned, there's all kinds of things that we need to think about, like our sports medicine folks and, equipment and disinfecting of locker rooms. What how do you look at, when this starts to open up again, the things that we have to think of in the athletics world that are maybe a little bit even on top of just general testing?
First of all, you're from Brooklyn. Dr. Fauci's from Brooklyn. I feel like you ought to be able to get us those answers. I mean, somebody was from my hometown in Oklahoma, I could get you the answer right away. There's 900 of us. So,
Call them up.
no, I think, there's such a broad variety of things that can happen, but it seems like there's going to be three that are fairly concrete. One is, do we have a way to check people's temperatures when they're entering buildings and that kind of stuff, and then two is, do we have a readily available test that we get results back very, very quickly? And I don't know all the up-to-date information on that, other than it's my understanding that people are very bullish on those kind of tests being available in the coming weeks. And then the third thing is what's the latest on vaccination, and certainly that's that those three things are going to be critical. And I echo what Joe says, that I'm so it's like a ghost town when you go to our building. It's sad, and you miss the kids, and you don't realize how much you really missed them until they were gone. But I don't want them to come back one day before we can tell them that they're safe. And so I think that safety part of it is critical, and we have a lot riding on this. Kids' eligibility, their academic progress, their athletic progress, their mental and emotional health and growth. We have people whose livelihoods and not super wealthy coaches. We're talking about entry-level people that make very modest salaries that depend on us being able to get back. But we're not in that alone, and there's a lot of resources that are being put into getting us back and getting us back safely. And I think all of those things are going to come into play on when we can return. And in Texas this week, we started phase one of kind of returning to normal. And I don't know exactly what was included in phase one, because I can tell no differences. But I think the point of that is I think the state wants to very slowly start to introduce things because our cases have leveled off and started to decline a little bit. And that way, if they see a spike, they know where we can go back to. And so perhaps we'll see some of that, in the coming days and weeks and months that will make us feel a lot better about putting a full plan in place. But I think you'll see things like dorms don't bunk people together. We're talking about that, one kid to a room. A lot of adjustments and changes like that that's going to be driven by campus, and then we'll work in conjunction with them to make sure that our student athletes are safe.
So let's pivot a little bit away from the virus to the regular day-to-day goals and plans that you already had in place prior to COVID-19 in terms of strategic planning and facilities. We got a question from the audience from Wayne Stickney, said, as many of us see our project fundraising taking a hit, how might you be pivoting your involvement with fundraising moving forward? I'd expand that to just regular everyday things that you're trying to focus on in light of also having to focus on COVID-19. How do you keep the ball moving in facility projects and strategic planning and things like that? Wren, you want to start us off?
Yeah, we definitely are still keeping an eye on our strategic plan and our facilities master plan. I would not be being honest if I didn't say there will be some delays specifically with the more costly initiatives and facilities. Right now, people who have liquidity, they're hanging on to it. Cash is king in this environment, and so you're seeing people really try to hang on to that. And so, but at some point, we'll resume. I think you'll see some projects scaled back. But as we're going through budgets this fiscal year, next fiscal year, we're trying to make decisions that don't leave us in such a deep hole that we can't pick back up on all of our initiatives. And we've made a lot of progress here due to some hard work of our staff, and we want to make sure that we pick that right back up as we come out of this. And I think in terms of the donor front, while it is probably not an environment to go out and be trying to raise a lot of money, especially for bricks and mortar and that kind of stuff, I do think there's some kind of soft ask that can be made for scholarships and support of students that are going through hardships and related to this. But it's a great time to just build relationships, to call your donors, check in on them, make sure they're healthy. Tell them that you appreciate them, you love them. We're as we get gifts in, and we're still having people who are making commitments, especially to our scholarship fund. Our notes are reflecting. We appreciate your support always, but especially in this uncertain time. And and so I think you can still stay focused on preparing for the ramp up and kicking right back into those initiatives as you come out of this. But definitely there's going to be some delays in the timeline of a lot of those projects and a lot of things that you had planned to do.
Joe?
I think Wren outlined it exceptionally well. The point about the relational capital that we have has always been and will always be a key component to any of the fundraising that we do. And so we really can't do much. Some of them can't do much except try to strengthen that bond between the university and them, because that's a key part of the reason why they are involved. And we've involved not only our staff, I'm making calls, coaches are making calls, student athlete are making calls, just to tell them we're thinking of them, we're checking in on them, expressing our appreciation. Just like Wren said, that's an easy, almost no-brainer kind of thing we should be doing right now. Some of them will have questions, some of them are having concerns, some of them have lost their retirement, some of them have lost their job, some of them are on the threshold of possibly losing their business. As some of you watched yesterday, the price of oil dropped to below zero. That's never happened in the history of the world. And I'm not really sure what to make of that. But as Will and Reese know from about Oklahoma, but Texas can be in that conversation, several other states in that conversation. Oil and gas are big parts of the commerce of a state. You can imagine what that's going to do going forward. When we all, quote unquote, start getting back on campus, there's still another part that's going to affect what we do and decide, and that's the economy. And the economy, we know will come back. We know will come back stronger in the long run, but we can't sit here and predict exactly how long it will take for it to come back to the way we knew it 40 days ago. And so we're going to have to build our plans around being as successful as we can in whatever environment that is.
Right. So we've got folks in our audience from institutions of every size, Division I, Division II, Division III. When you talk about some of the tough decisions that might need to be made, obviously we're used to making tough decisions in our jobs, especially when it comes to personnel and budgets. But in a crisis like this, and as you mentioned, unprecedented, things that have never happened in the history of the world, like oil going into the negative for a barrel, we may be forced to make bigger budget decisions. We've all heard about institutions that are doing furloughs and layoffs, and we've seen some of our higher profile colleagues that have taken voluntary pay cuts, but we've also seen smaller institutions that are closing. We've seen teams that have been discontinued. How do you think, Joe, how do you go about thinking about the tough decisions that we may need to make? And how do you communicate that with your coaches and your staff? And what are you hearing from them about their uneasiness?
It's funny, not funny in a humorous way, but there are certain things you can't really talk about with too many people until you have a plan, because everybody has this somewhere in their mind, depending on how it might affect them, and their family. There's a lot of uneasiness, anxiety, apprehension. I mentioned those calls that I'm having with our staff, 2, 3 a week. Every single call I've been on, that question has come up. They want to know. It's in the front of their mind, not the back of their mind. And I can only address it head on. I think this is a time where leaders really have to be strong in leading. Yet, as we mentioned at the outset of this call, the uncertainty piece doesn't allow us just to say something with just, in a definitive way. And that's frustrating for all of us. And the staff we're talking to, as well as those of us who are having to be in the decision-making process. So what we're trying to do is, think about the culture that we tried to create for years, what it's built on, which is obviously the way we invest in our people. And investing isn't just a monetary piece of it, but that's part of it. We look at the budget overall. We look at what generates the revenue. We're going to do the best we can to try to avoid any impact on people or by connection, their families. But depending on how much of what gets decided impacts their streams of revenue, all of those kinds of things are on the table. And I've just been upfront saying those are the kinds of mechanisms that we might have to consider going forward to manage shortfalls in revenue. I don't know how many on this call have already received calls from different people. We talked about donors. Some have made their contribution. I've had a few call and ask if they could have it back, because as Wren said, their liquidity is gone. We're already now hearing from other parts of our business that are going to start asking for delays on payments. And that's for this budget year. We're not even, into the next budget year yet. So just being transparent with everybody, we're sitting here trying to adjust as best we can. We've gone in and made as many cuts as we can to the budget right now, held off on expenses that we think, can be delayed for whatever period of time, unforeseen period of time. But there's no way around sugarcoating it. It's going to happen. And we're trying just to minimize the impact. But that question that got put out there at the beginning of this call, depending on what we do with sports that generate, significant amount of revenue, these kind of decisions are only going to get tougher, and the cuts are only going to go deeper. I don't say that for dramatic effect. I don't say that to be cavalier or insensitive whatsoever. It's just the reality.
Yeah, I think what's really tough, and Joe hit on this some, but is just the broad continuum of possibilities and trying to develop plans around those. Everything is on the table for us right now, and I've tried to be candid with our staff to let them know that, but they also know what our priorities are. We have not yet laid anybody off or done a reduction in force or furlough. We may get to that. Certainly, we'll work with campus if campus gets to that. But I think if you talk about value in people all the time, and that's the first thing you go to, I'm not sure how you message that to your staff. And so we're going through a lot of exercises to cut some other areas first. Now, it's difficult. I don't know what Joe's percentage is, but over 60% of my budget is tied up in two categories: scholarships and salary benefits. And so when you start trying to make meaningful cuts out of operating budgets, it doesn't take a long time to really be struggling to get there. What we've tried to do is take every expense we have. We went through our budget. Our budget's about 40 million, a little under 39, and drop every expense into one of three buckets: essential, important, elective, and we're cutting kind of in that order. The elective is going first. We pretty much have removed all of that. So we're looking at important things and trying to prioritize what's most important. And our last thing that we would cut is essential. We sit on the minimum number of sports at 16, but I'll be honest, we've run the cost of those sports relative to other potential sports offerings if worse come to worse. And so my hope is that we don't have to diminish opportunities for student athletes. My hope is that we don't reduce scholarships in a meaningful way. But as Joe said, you're going to have to make some difficult decisions in this as you go down the stretch. And I think it's definitely, you have to have a plan as you hit each of those trigger points to know what you're going to do.
Jason, this is again, I'm not trying to pick out metaphors that are dramatic, but this is it's sort of like a tsunami. Maybe the first wave is very noticeable and it can do damage, but usually a tsunami has more than one wave, and we don't know how many waves we're going to get hit with. And so we're like Wren says, we're planning around these models that would minimize impact as best we can, have our priorities in the right order, which start with, again, student athlete welfare. And I think one other thing that's helped, although it doesn't involve everybody, but the strategy of getting people on the staff involved in a lot of this contingency planning, they've been educated. They see it. Look, we didn't have our success because of one or two people, and we won't have success because of one or two people going forward. So it's going to take everybody working on this together, sharing it, owning it, and really thinking more positively about what it is we can do to position ourselves to emerge from this in good shape, ready to take on whatever we can at that time, and continue to keep the foot on the gas going forward.
And I'll just add this, and Joe mentioned involving your team around you. We sat around the table as an executive team for a couple of meetings looking at what can we cut, and then we kind of arrived at the conclusion of we're not the subject matter experts. We see this budget at a high level, so we can sit here and talk about, well, we could cut this sport's travel, we could cut this sport operation or equipment. But ultimately, we pushed it back to the units, the individual sports and the units on the other side of the department, and said, if we gave you this cut, where would you take it? What would you sacrifice? What would the impact be? And they've come up with some really good ideas. And in some cases, we had one sport that almost doubled the target that we had given them that they thought they could cut. Now, I'm sure they're not thinking that's permanent. They're probably thinking for a year or two. But, I do think it's really important to engage your team and utilize your team and your staff in these situations, because if you try and do that from a 30,000 foot viewpoint, you may not have pick up the most efficiencies that are there.
Yeah, and I think that, everyone is probably finding throughout this that we're finding new ways to be creative and new ways to think about doing things that even will go on post pandemic. So obviously in times of crisis, we're finding ways to be better. I'm curious to ask you both in a minute about some ways that you found that your staffs have been creative in terms of technology and recruiting. But I want to get to a question from the audience. Our good friend John Robertson has weighed in here, and it's a great question asking, what is it that you need right now that you wish you had, but that you don't have as a way to stay connected with student athletes, recruits, and donors? If you could pick something that you say, wow, this is something I realize I need that we don't have at our disposal.
I think probably for me, when it comes to student athletes, all of them having at home stable internet connections and the necessary equipment to do. I think most of us are used to having that at home, and most of them are when they're on campus or in their apartment in Denton or Norman, wherever, wherever the campus is. But as they went back home, in some cases they don't have stable internet connection, and they're feeling a lot of financial pressures, that to also help their families and that kind of thing. And so, I think for us, trying to find ways to make sure that everybody has the tools to be available digitally while we're going through, being separated from each other. I think that would be something that would be very helpful, and I do believe the NCAA is providing some relief in some of those areas for us to be able to assist with some of that.
Well, wishful thinking on my part, but more answers and less questions. We're just, there's so many different fronts to this. We don't really have anything stable in our own world, let alone the world around us. And that's really counter to what we are used to. One of the things we try to create is structure and consistency and being intentional about what we do when everybody's together. And that's obviously being directly impacted by everything going on. So, but I will say this, to be candid, Jason, we're trying to get people to be more engaged to control the controllables. There's just a lot of things out there that we can't control right now. And it goes back to a comment I made earlier. Let's address what's in our grasp at the moment. We have to be far more intentional and try to avoid being accidental. We know things are going to happen out of our control. We'll respond to those as possible. But while we have this moment, thinking about the intentionality of being ready for the things that are going to directly affect us whenever it is we're allowed to return, because ultimately that's the way we're going to be defined, by how we responded to this all and the priorities we kept in order, taking care of our staff, working together to face the new reality.
I want to encourage folks, if they do have questions, use that Q&A panel. We should have a few minutes to take a couple more. Sticking with that topic, have either of you found ways that coaches and your staff have come up with ways to be more creative in terms of recruiting in this environment, or doing searches in this environment, things like that?
Yes, we have, and actually that's been one of the good examples of what we talked about earlier, seeing the best of our staffs emerge. I'm sure a lot of people on this staff, if not themselves, have come up with some ideas because of the situation that we're in, and people are responding, and they're responding with a smile on their face and helping each other. Wow, really an interesting concept there. Reaching across different departments and not worrying about that's not my area. They're trying to say, okay, what can I do to help, and what's most important? And communicating and staying connected, I think, has been, if not the top of the list, but right at the top of the list. And I've seen our coaches try to engage. I mean, we know the difference between Cara and Rara and what we can do. We have some limitations. You know, we can't watch student athletes work out. We can't put them through any drills. We can't do anything like that. And they've been inventive about writing plans or doing informational videos or instructional videos that they can send, even though there's no way to watch what they're doing to respond. They're obviously coaches are connected to their teams as much as they can. I think the NCAA's move to expand it to 8 hours, which is our normal out of season time, is helping. But the recruiting piece, that's where I've probably seen the greatest innovations come on. All the digital stuff we were doing probably helps a lot, but now with coaches figuring out how to do virtual on-campus visits and you know what we can do there. I mean, everybody's practicing all the social distancing, all the kinds of things we got to be mindful of, but they've been very creative of how to deal with that going forward, because we know we're not going to be having recruits on campus most likely through the rest of the summer. So they're trying to figure out ways that they can come up with engaging families and around the recruiting rules as they evolve. So, you know, seeing all of that, and I think some of the student athletes have come up with some great ideas of engaging with each other through social media. So that's been really fun. But I am very cognizant about one thing, and that's the longer this goes, the more that we're going to hear from student athletes and or staff. You know, we had the first few weeks where people were kind of running on adrenaline and dealing with it. It was, you know, at that point, seemingly, you know, may not last for as long as now it feels like it's going to last. And now they've, you know, used up a lot of techniques, and you still maybe have 30, 45 days or more, you know, before we're back together. And you're, like Wren was saying, we're hearing about, you know, more and more stresses that our student athletes are facing being at home, especially if, you know, some of their families were already economically challenged, and now any one of their family members have lost jobs. And, you know, all the things that they've become really happy about having when they're here, including craving that structure that they have. You know, they don't have that right now. So we're trying, again, to be proactive in our thinking with our performance folks, with obviously involving compliance, talking to our conference ADs and the conference overall, sharing that across conferences. Mental health is going to be a growing area of demand if it hasn't been already. So those are the kinds of things we're trying to talk about now before we, you know, hit a point where it becomes, you know, too much for us to handle.
Yeah, and I mean, Joe hit on most of it. So, you know, I won't say a lot other than, you know, I do think two fairly innovative things that's come out of ours is we've learned for student athlete personal development and professional development, we're getting better participation on these Zoom sessions. And so, you know, you're looking at those budgets. That kind of seems like an area it's going to be hard to not take some from. But what we have found is we can save the travel cost for those people and do Zoom sessions. And while you miss a little bit on the interpersonal communication, it's very easy to have breakout small group discussions, that kind of stuff. So there's also some benefits to it, and it saves a lot of money. And so we're doing some of that now, and we're looking to do more of that and deliver it more in that way. So I think we're picking up a lot of efficiencies. And then last thing for us is we've had a facilities link on our page, but I would say we fall short of any kind of virtual facilities tour or a virtual visit type thing. And so we're spending a lot of time ramping that up and trying to get that, which is something we've talked about and we should have done anyway. But I think coming out of this, we're going to be able from a distance to give prospective student athletes a much better vision for what we have to offer in our department than what we could going into this. And I know probably everybody is looking at those options, but I'm excited about what we're looking at.
Yeah, we've gotten a few questions from the audience too along those lines about how things look coming out of COVID-19 world here. And I think that what we're seeing, is that there are lessons that we're going to take away, and we're going to be able to continue, those practices as we come out of this. We got a question from Emma Crumley asking how will going through this pandemic experience alter how you communicate to external constituents in a post-COVID-19 world. Have you thought about that, Wren, or are we not at that point yet where we can really break it down?
Well, communication is critical all the time, but particularly when you're going through something like this and there is uncertainty. And I think what I would tell the people on the call and people that are studying, whether they are an AD or they want to be an AD, is just because there aren't substantial updates and you don't have the answers doesn't mean that it's a waste of time to communicate. Sometimes my updates with my coaches are not that much different than the last update we had. But time and time again, I'll get a text or something after we have a call and just, hey, we appreciate you taking time to update us, because even if it's a small update, we're getting, I know Joe is probably too. I mean, we were talking about this before, Jason, you as well, before we went live. I'm on Zoom sessions, it seems like 5-6 hours a day at least. So I have information overload. It's not answers, but it's lots of discussion and those kind of things. A lot of our coaches and our staff and our student athletes don't have that. So I think the more that we can just have conversation with them, and same thing with our external stakeholders. We're going to do our first Zoom session with donors tomorrow night. We'll try to continue to do those as long as we're distanced periodically, just to let them know where we're at and what we're going through.
Great. Joe, Jim Paquette asked, how would you prefer the NCAA to communicate with ADs and presidents on decisions that they're making?
Yeah, I want to hear this, Joe.
Look, I can deal with a chain of command. They don't have to be thinking about the way I want to be communicated to. I can deal with the chain of command that comes through our conferences. And it's really tough right now because as people know, there's probably any number of people on this call that have been serving on a wide variety of committees. And those committees have been doing their work. Even through this time we've been away from campus. The transfer working group is an example. The Division I Council, my goodness, talk about some people who are carrying an extra load. Anybody that's serving on the council, they're having to hear from all the other committees that are dealing with sport-related matters. This idea that we were talking about earlier, and things that are changing in our world. Last week, we all hear about the change in regards to standardized testing. The way the decision was communicated about extending eligibility for those in spring sports. They're coming at us from all different directions. I just would rather like to have them come through some form that we know about it and we can communicate it to our staff, or even communicate it that it's coming in the next day or two, rather than have it come out. I've learned about a couple of decisions on Twitter, and that's not the right way for us to be receiving information and then turning it around and giving it to our staff. The emails that we're all getting right now from everywhere are, I bet you I have 400, 500, 600 a day, and I'm on these Zoom calls. Maybe I need to have one of my staff just read my email. But I don't want to hear, hey, I just sent you an email and I've got to go through 500, 600 of them to figure out, where that was. Especially if we're having ongoing conversations with our conferences. I feel bad for our conferences because they didn't have the information either. And so unless they happen to have somebody that was sitting, in or part of one of those groups. So that's not a good answer. That's a long way to a no answer. I'm sorry. I don't know where I really fall down on that, Wren.
No,
Yeah, I
no,
just
no.
fell down overall.
Well, I think that, and we talked about it on the call before everybody got on it. It would have been hard to believe if you told us 6 weeks ago that we'd actually be more busy now when we are sitting at home on a screen and having to be at all these meetings, and then first, getting to your hundreds of emails at night. So I think that a lot of folks on the call are feeling your pain as well as we go through it. But let me pivot to another question here from the audience, Wren. You talked a little bit about coaches' salaries earlier, and this is another one where there's probably, there may not be a good answer, but we'll throw it out there. With a lot of summer activity being canceled, this comes from Dan Trump. This is a big blow for coaches in terms of being able to make ends meet and salary that they certainly were counting on having. What are thoughts on how, in some form or fashion, we help to make those folks whole?
Well, in some cases, we can't. When you look at volunteer coaches, for instance, that oftentimes will make all of their earnings through the camp, but we're prohibited from compensating them directly. And that's why on our campus, listen, we're sitting here today, it's highly unlikely we're going to have any summer camps. But I have fought really hard to make those decisions let's set some points throughout the summer and cancel them for this period of time and that period of time, because if we get to late July and the picture looks much better, and we can have camps, I think some of those people's livelihoods do depend on it. I don't want to seem outside of volunteer coaches who by and large, a big majority of what they bring in comes from camps. Outside of that, while I'm sympathetic to our coaches who have lost some compensation related to camps, when you're looking at the scope of everything you're dealing with, I wouldn't be being honest if I didn't say that's not real high on my personal concern list. I hate that, but I'm much more concerned with how can their actual pay through the university be protected to the extent that we can, and how can we not lay people off, and how can we avoid cutting sports or cutting scholarships. And so, when you go back to those buckets I talked about, essential, important, elective, I'm not sure that that's going to fall in that essential budget for us. And so, it'd be different if some schools maybe have some type of camp commitment or guarantee in the coach's contract. We don't have that at North Texas. And so that's not our obligation. Now, it is my understanding that some of those, if they have a private LLC, most of our coaches do, may be eligible for some potential small business loans and that kind of stuff. And so we have passed on what information we have about that to our coaches and told them they should get with their accountants and attorneys and see if that's an option for them.
Let me ask you both a question that actually doesn't have to do with our jobs, but certainly folks I think would be interested in knowing. You mentioned, Wren, how you talked to your staff and asked them some personal questions. Joe, also your small group meetings. What is one thing that each of you will take out of this time in history that you will be really, really, in a way thankful, maybe, let's say, that it happened? What's something good that you've seen come out of this so far?
Joe, you want to go first?
Well, I might be repeating myself, but I think greater appreciation for each other. The idea that people can really step up if they're called up. And, we hear that term used a lot by our coaches in sports. You've heard that, somebody gets hurt and it opens the door for somebody else to step in and, fill that role. And you always hear coaches say, well, you just have to step up, and I think we're seeing that with our teams, and I mean teams of our staff. I think our teams themselves have done a really good job at helping connect with each other too. But when I talk about this example, I'm talking about staff members, regardless of their title, regardless of their direct influence, over a lot of the department. They've got a lot to offer, and they've come up with some ideas. Wren, there's one we started. I want to give our development staff under Zach Selman the props on this, but they're doing classes with our donors and our former, I guess you could say, former student athletes, but our letter winners. Once or twice a week, they're actually doing workouts, and our strength coach is leading them. And those kinds of things that are emerging, and that's a great idea by our strength staff that they're using that. It's funny, we can lead that for donors, but we can't do it for student athletes.
Okay. Right.
Joe, just while you were talking, the NCAA announced that in fact you cannot do that for donors. That just come out on Twitter.
Well, we thought maybe we were going to have the best conditioned donor group of any university coming out of this, after those kind of things. But like you're saying, those town halls you're having, the conversations, all of those are just examples of ideas that really came from the staff. They're not coming top down. But I think when we all emerge from this, one, we better take the opportunity to recognize we do have a chance to shape the future. The 21st century is going to continue to go on, and maybe we got pushed into accepting some of these opportunities to communicate with each other, to use technology different. Maybe it's accelerated that to some degree than people would have ever thought of. And now it's going to become commonplace. And so we got to be ready to think about, well, what does that mean for us in the day-to-day part? What does it mean for us in engaging fans when they're on our campuses, et cetera? But I just think it's more important for us to be thinking about how we are going to shape the 21st century, be very intentional about it, and be ready.
Yeah, I for me, I think just an appreciation for how important and precious family time is, and I hope one of the long-term things that comes out of this is coaches who we all know, many of them burn the candle at both ends at the sacrifice at times of their family, see the impact that they can have and what they're missing every day with their kids. And I look back, and we've probably had more meals together as a family in the last month than we've had maybe in my kids' lives. And so, I think for me on a personal level, that's definitely, something that I'm going to take away from this. And my wife and I got to spend a lot more time together. Most of the time that's gone very well. At times there's been a tension. I think one day I told her she made an excellent day drinking homeschool teacher. I should not have probably said that. But I think spending this time together, you find out that it's precious and how much you appreciate getting to watch your kids go through different stages, watch the way they learn, watch the way that they interact with their classmates from afar. That's been really fun for me.
That is great. Well, guys, I think we're just about out of time. I'm gonna throw one last question at you from the audience before we wrap up, and this is one that you can't possibly really answer, but it's an interesting question. What do you see? This comes from Scott Lowenberg. As the latest date, we could make a decision on whether the fall semester is on campus and what sports will be played. So I throw that out there to you, knowing that you can't really possibly, unless you want me to get Dr. Fauci on speed dial for you, Wren. But
I think Joe probably will have. I would defer to him a little bit on that, but I do think there's a lot of different things being considered right now. Could we start August 1 and start season October 1? Could there be a spring season? Can we accelerate the prep time to 6 weeks? And here's what I know. There's a lot at stake, and not just dollars. There's a lot at stake if we're not able to have a fall sports season. It's catastrophic for many individuals, many businesses beyond just athletic departments. There's a lot of businesses in town that count on game day, and that's a significant part of their revenue. And I think from a mental and emotional health, as we come out of this, as Joe alluded to earlier, the economy recovery is not going to be instant. That's going to be lengthy, and people are under a lot of mental and emotional stress right now. And so sports has always been a great release. It's always helped us turn the page, and we're going to need to provide that for people. So I don't have an answer on what the time will be, but I do think we'll be very malleable to do whatever we can to get the fall sports season in, with the caveat, provided that we are 100% sure that the student athletes can do so in an environment that doesn't risk their health and safety. So, that's my long-winded non-answer to the question.
Well, I realize on this call we have people representing universities that don't sponsor football, but they do have fall sports, and so their deadlines might be different. But I think at some point here, in the next 45 days at the most, we're going to have to be making some decisions. I don't want to say it's June this or June that, as the exact date, because I don't know what that means. But I think in 45 days, we're going to know as much as we're going to be able to know about making a decision about the fall. And as Wren mentioned, that might mean anything from starting on time to a shortened season, to some other form of play, to moving it, to a different time, maybe, and I'm talking about football now, maybe to the spring. So we're doing all that modeling. But I go back to something I've said 2 or 3 times here. It'd be a lot easier to answer that question if you could tell me when we are going to get our student athletes back on campus. And as I mentioned, there are non-negotiable elements of what we do, and we will never sacrifice health, welfare, safety of student athletes or our staff, for that matter, because you think about bringing them back requires us to have staff back, and practices involve many more people than just the student athletes. So that's always part of the factor. So I would say that be positive, to stay optimistic, keep the faith, all of that. Rely on the character that you have. We're seeing character being revealed in some special ways right now. You want your own to your staff. That's so important. But when we make our decisions that are rooted in the best interests of the people that we serve, not the national narrative always, but rooted in the best interest of the people we serve, starting first and foremost with our student athletes and staff, we're going to come out making better informed and better decisions in the long run. And that's what we're going to try to do. And we've got the next period of time to keep thinking innovatively, to be ready to embrace whatever it is when we do emerge. And we're going to emerge, and in the long run, we're going to be stronger for all of this.
That is well said, gentlemen. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Jason,
yes, Wren.
real quick, I want to say on the call, before we got on here, we had a conversation about changes that come out of this. And Zach, Joe pretty much committed to ties 1 day a week. I mean, and this is the first time I've been a sport coach since this hit. And Joe called that shot. He tried to leave it to me, and I said, from Valley, Oklahoma, we'll be in Carhartt and camo. And Joe said, sports jacket it is. So I just want the staff at Oklahoma to know good times are coming. This dress code is going to be relaxed. You guys, And the last thing I would say is back to Oklahoma and Tiger King. Joe with the fedoras, the different facial hair that he wears at times of the year, his affinity for finding small diners and little places to eat. Joe is the true Joe Exotic, and to me, it's unfortunate that's been spoiled by the Tiger King. So, Joe, I just want to say thank you. I know you have a whole lot of things. You sit on committees. You're one of the giants in the industry, and I really do value your friendship, and I appreciate you taking time to be on the call with us.
Well, the feeling's mutual, Wren, and even though now my staff are all excited now that the dress code in our department has changed. Those of you who know me, I'm a traditional person, but it's time for change. So 21st century, here we come. But thank you, Jason, thank you, Will, and thank you to all those people that have stayed on the call that we can't see, but we appreciate what you do. And I promise you, I've been in your shoes various points in my career, and I learned so much from each of you, even today. I'm really lucky to be in this kind of a role to serve people and serve student athletes. And thanks for what you do, because I'm watching. As one of my friends said, it's not R&D doesn't mean research and development. It means rip off and duplicate. And so we're all watching each other for some ideas, and no one has to worry about being the receiver of credit. We all win. That's the main thing. Thank you, Wren, again, Jason, Will, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Joe, and Will, thank you so much for having me. This was really an honor and a pleasure for me, and Will, Laura, and I want to say thank you to everybody watching, and especially Forrest. We miss you and look forward to seeing you in person soon at the next CALS. Everyone, please keep your eye open for your inbox and on Twitter for information about future CALS conversations. We'd love to have your feedback so we can do this again while we're locked down on quarantine. And again, my very special thanks to Wren and Joe for taking the time, and wish everybody well. Please stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Jason. Great job.
Thank you.